And as promised on the Ron Johnson Show, we have Courtney Cronin, do it all ESPNer, Vikings fans. That's where you know her from. She covered the Vikings. She broke tons of stories. She was BFFs with the kicker. No, she wasn't. But she had a lot of takes that for some reason the fans could never get over. Courtney Cronin, thanks for joining the show.
Thanks for
And
having me.
Courtney, I'm gonna jump right into this, Courtney. So I heard you on K-Fan talk about the quarterback situation in Minnesota, and Vikings fans, for some reason, were not happy with that. Spice Adams says that he thinks Kirk Cousins is a top 10 quarterback. What are your thoughts now on them extending Kirk again? Because I know you had some things to say about that.
Yeah, I think that it was a move that was predetermined before they hired a new staff with Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah and Kevin O'Connell. I think that this is a direction that leadership wants to go, and leadership and ownership combined, because they still think that they have a really good roster and that this roster is capable of getting a few different pieces, moving a few things around, and contending in the NFC North. I mean, they've got the second best win total behind the Green Bay Packers, and then there's such a gap between Minnesota and teams like Chicago and Detroit that they still feel that this is their window to win. They've got a ton of star playmakers on offense between Adam Thielen, Justin Jefferson, Dalvin Cook. You're going to get Irv Smith back this year. So I feel like the Vikings look at this now and say the problem in 2021 was coaching and the leadership in the front office. It's very clear that's where they're pinning the blame for every shortcoming that happened in 2021 and really in 2020, back-to-back losing seasons. So they extend Kirk Cousins on this 1-year deal and give him, a lot of leverage by adding the no trade clause back into his contract, because you'll remember the extension he was just on did not have that in. And I think that they're trying to run it back and say, okay, let's see what a change in coaching, let's see what a change in scheme and mindset can do for Kirk Cousins. So it'll truly be the test this year to find out if he really is indeed that top 10 quarterback that some people tend to think he is, or if this team will not necessarily get over the hump with Cousins at quarterback and might want to look towards a different option in the future. Like, this will be that, that year where you can find that answer out, depending upon how the season goes in 2022.
Yeah, and former Bears defensive lineman Spice Adams, as well as Alex Brown, I asked them about Justin Fields. Spice on the show, Alex aside from that, but I asked them on the show about Justin Fields versus Kirk Cousins. And there's a lot of quarterbacks people would trade their quarterback for, the upper echelon. You look at Tom Brady, you look at Drew Brees, you look at Aaron Rodgers. I would even say throw Russell Wilson in there for a lot of people. They would take those quarterbacks over the current quarterback they have. But when you look at Justin Fields, and I asked Spice, would you take Kirk over Justin? He said no, because of the money. He said if that wasn't 30 million-ish out there, he said for sure, because Kirk Cousins is a top 10 quarterback. Is that kind of the same mindset you think you would have in that situation now that you're, in the Bears around the Bears organization? Do you think that Kirk Cousins does bring you more if the money was down to, let's say, 15 million than a Justin Fields would?
Potentially, but we also don't know what Justin Fields is yet. Like, this year is his
Mm-hmm.
rookie season, and I think that you can give that, chalk that up for Trevor Lawrence as well, because right,
Yep.
we're giving Jacksonville a mulligan. So I feel like, given the situation in Chicago as well, where you have an entire staff that was just fired and a new staff brought in, this is the year where you get to start answering some of those questions about Justin
Yeah.
Fields and is he going to be your franchise guy? But you're not going to know that after the 2022 season. Like, it's going to take 2 years to figure that out, which, when we talk financials, Ron, having a rookie quarterback or quarterback on his rookie deal, that benefits you because you can build around him still. And this is a
Yeah.
talent deficient team. Like, that's just is what it is. Like, there's no offensive line. There's very few receivers that, are proven talents for Justin Fields to throw to. And I mean, like, defensively, they're retooling as well. So you can look at it through that lens. I don't think they're parallel situations whatsoever between Chicago and Minnesota. I mean, it is interesting because there's brand new staffs in both places, both
Mm-hmm.
in the coaching staff and the front office. So we'll see whose plan works out better in terms of Chicago ripping it down to the studs. That's what they're doing. They have 57 players under contract right now. Like, they have a lot of work to do, and it's not going to take 1 year. It's probably going to take 2 to 3 years to get to the point where you're even competitive. But the Vikings are trying to run it back and say, okay, our plan is to not rip it down to the studs. It's to try to insulate the quarterback and, add a couple pieces here and there, bolster the pass rush. I really did like the Zadarius Smith signing, but we'll see if it all pans out. And if you have a quarterback that costs as much as Kirk Cousins, will that, we know that they were still able to make some signings in free agency, and that's obviously like a good thing for this front office to pull off those moves. But if at the end you're still an 8-9 team, and you can, whether you want to, whether you're going to look at this and say, okay, the blame this year can go on the quarterback or it goes elsewhere, like you're still an 8-9 team. Like that's the thing that I don't understand. When people get upset about that, and the Kirk Cousins, very polarizing conversation that happens around the quarterback. If you're not winning games, and if you're not like at a point where you're making the playoffs and making a deep push in the playoffs, then you have to look at how you're allocating resources and figuring out, okay, does the road end here? Because he's only going to get more and more expensive. Like that's the thing. Like he's a good quarterback. No one has ever said he's not, but the price tag and what that reflects in terms of wins and how far you get in the postseason, sometimes those things don't line up. So yeah, like in theory, would you like to hit on a rookie quarterback in the draft and carry that guy through, sign him to an extension after you pick up, maybe let's say he's a first rounder, you pick up his 5th-year option, the whole thing? Yeah, that's the dream, but like that's just not realistic for a lot of franchises. Like the hit rate on these players is not like 100%. It's not even 50% most times. So I think you're rolling the dice there. And, Chicago, I think it's fair to say he's probably the most important draft pick in franchise history because they have not ever been able to get the quarterback position right. And like that's not an exaggeration. Like their last franchise quarterback was Sid Luckman. Like they have not had stability. They've always been constantly turning this thing over for 50 years. Like that's Vikings fans are lucky because they know that they have not dealt with those same sort of circumstances, and it's just different. So everything now needs to be geared to the quarterback in Chicago so they can finally get out of this.
Yeah, I mean, and the word lucky for Vikings fans, I think I'm gonna toe the line because I mean, the like you said, the Bears looking at the Vikings like, man, look at your quarterback situation, but the Vikings looking at the Packers like they've only had Aaron Rodgers and Brett Favre as long as I can remember, and so when you think about the NFC North and you think about where it kind of plays out now, you have 3 teams potentially, 2 for sure, most likely the Bears as well will stay in it, a 3-4 defense. And so now you look at the Ravens, Steelers, and that 3-4 defense and kind of how team has the NFC North, are they starting to, you know, maybe get into that AFC North where it's going to kind of start to be more of a cannibalizing each other versus a, dominant team, second team, and the other 2 lowers? Because when you look at the AFC North, the Ravens, the Steelers, the Browns even now, and then of course the Bengals. I mean, any of those 4, well, at least the Steelers, we'll see what happens with them. But in the past, any of those 4, the past like 2 years, I'd say could be in the playoffs. Do you think with the Lions, Campbell getting another year now, do you think the NFC North has a chance to become that where, any of the 4 have a chance to be in the playoffs?
No, absolutely not. I think that the Lions and the Bears are so far away from, like, this is such a top heavy division. It's Green Bay,
Yeah.
and then like it's Minnesota, and then there's like a humongous drop off between the Bears and the Lions. Like if you're looking at it based on win totals that came out last week, Green Bay's at 11.5. They're like top of the
Yep.
NFC with the Buccaneers. The NFC itself is very top heavy. It's like 4 teams and then another big drop off. So I
Yep.
think that it's structured the way that you'd expect it to be when you still have Aaron Rodgers in this division. And yeah, I understand that Devontae Adams doesn't play here anymore. I don't think that's as much of a franchise altering or, a division altering move. Could be a franchise altering move. But like, look what happened when the Vikings traded Stephon Diggs. They went out and they got Justin Jefferson. And you know what? The passing
Yeah.
game that season was fine. So I think that there's
Yeah.
ways you have to address it. You can't be stagnant and complacent and say, okay, well, you're not going to replace Devontae Adams with a high round draft pick or somebody who's just as talented and rely on Alan Lazard and Randall Cobb if he's still going to play this season. But anyways, like I just look at this and I see 2 teams, one team that's the clear cut head and shoulders above everyone else. That's Green Bay. And then Minnesota trying to say, hey, we still see a window for ourselves here
Yep.
to establish dominance in this division. Because them establishing dominance though over like the Bears and the Lions, like congratulations. That's not a huge accomplishment. The Lions are still like on the ground floor trying to build this thing. And I think that Dan Campbell will eventually be successful there. I mean, you see guys want to play for him, and you see that this team is starting the rebuilding process because they now have high draft capital. And with that number 2 pick, if they go take a quarterback, I think that would be the wisest thing that they could do. If they get Aiden Hutchinson, still also a very good pick, and they can address the quarterback 32nd overall. But if you want Malik Willis, go get him at 2 because he's not going to be there at 32. The Bears, though, are so far away. Like, they might be last in the division this year just based on what you expect from this roster. There's a lot of talent deficiencies here, and there's a lot of moves that they still have to make.
Well, a fun question for you to finish this out. You were one of the most polarizing Twitter accounts in Minnesota your time here. I don't know why you people loved you, and then there were dudes that absolutely hated you, and they would make the most misogynist tweets I've ever seen in my life. I had to defend you, and I don't need to defend you. You can defend yourself, but sometimes I would even jump in because it gets ridiculous how I see people make these comments. And so when you look at Bears Twitter, now you've only been there for a month, is Bears Twitter as volatile as Vikings Twitter?
It's different. These fans are so deprived of winning seasons. And yeah, I know that they made the playoffs in the 2018 season and 2020. This team has gone nowhere. So I think that the pitchforks have already come out because Bears fans have seen other teams around the NFL make a lot of moves during free agency, and they see Ryan Poles in the front office staying put. And people are aggressive, and I think that I can understand it, but this is a big market. Like, that's what people have to realize, like the difference when you go around the NFC North. Like, Chicago's the biggest city in the NFC North, and it's like the number 3 or 4 media market in the country. You're going to have really aggressive journalists trying to hold teams accountable, and you're going to have a really aggressive fan base. Like, that's the way it's always been down here. So, like, when I came onto the beat, and I've written, you're right, I've been here for about like a month and a half now. Like, everything I've written, you'll get people, like, all I'm doing is reporting what people have said and, like, explaining the process and analyzing things. But you have people who, like, will look at that and be so critical of what the Bears are doing that, and they're not afraid to voice it. And I can understand that. I think that it's not necessarily like personal attacks on like people covering the team. It's just more that they are so incensed by the lack of moves and Larry Ogunjobi, like just like the calamity of errors for this team in the offseason with Larry Ogunjobi failing his physical, and they can't even land a backup guard from Buffalo when Ryan Bates ended up signing the offer sheet from the Bills to stay over the one that he got from the Chicago Bears. Like, Buffalo matched it, and it's like, okay, well, then you're back at square one on the offensive line. So I mean, there's definitely a lot of frustration, but I think you've got to tread lightly when you first get onto a new beat to like learn the fan base, take the temperature of it, learn what makes people tick. But I will always love my interactions with Vikings Twitter, and I don't plan on stopping those.
Well, Courtney, thank you. We look forward to seeing your discussions with Vikings Twitter. That's Courtney Cronin, ESPN.